everyone should feel empowered to be an activist. Everyone should realize like being a good person and incrementally making the world better is something that everyone and anyone can do, and they can just do that iteratively every single day.
From PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs
in WETA,
this is On Our Minds
with Bree
and James,
a podcast made by teens for teens.
Because everyone deserves a place to feel heard. So, Bree, I know you've done some activism around climate change. Just curious, how did that begin for you?
So it really began during quarantine in 2020. I was, of course, locked away in my room and really curious about how the Earth is doing at the moment. So basically, I learned that, especially in the Caribbean, climate change disproportionately affects my community. My mom is Guyanese from Guyana and my dad's Jamaican. And just to learn how they're at risk of hurricanes and floods, it really caused me to become an activist. And even then, it made me want to start my activism in New York City and see how the climate crisis is impacting the city I'm currently living in. And from there, I got involved with lobbying, planning strikes, and doing outreach in schools. And even to think about some recent stuff I did, I helped organize a march in September that had over 75,000 people. So that was really cool.
Wow, that's so awesome and so impressive that you've done all of that at such a young age. Well, just like you, so many young people today are actually worried about climate change. In a recent survey that I read, 84% of young people were at least moderately worried about climate change, and almost 60% were very or extremely worried about climate change.
That's why I'm really excited about today's episode, because we got the chance to talk with the climate activist Sophia Kianni, who is only a few years older than us and has already done so much.
Yeah, she was the youngest member on the United Nations first youth advisory group on climate change. She's on a number of advisory boards, including one for Lady Gaga's Born This Way Foundation. She's been Vice Media's Human of the Year and one of Teen Vogue's 21 Under 21. And that's just to name a few.
And despite all of the awards and accolades, she was so easy to talk with and so down to earth. I think you listeners will love this conversation as much as I did.
Hi, Sophia. Thanks so much for speaking with us today.
Of course, I'm so excited. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us. It means so much. But just to get started, back in 2020, you worked with Student Reporting Labs in a journalism fellowship for Washington, D.C. area high school students. Thank you so much for reconnecting with SRL.
The fellowship was a super awesome experience for me because I think it really allowed me to develop my skills as a storyteller. I think reporting is really connected just generally with like content and media creation, which has just become a huge part of the work that I do. So I think really understanding how to craft stories, how to pitch them, how to adequately capture them helped me to actually understand how best to present and craft my own personal narrative.
Yeah, no, that's definitely super important. Yeah, speaking of that SRL fellowship, that's when you were kind of starting to build your youth-led international nonprofit, Climate Cardinals. So I was wondering if you could tell us how Climate Cardinals began.
I'm Iranian. My entire family is from Iran, and I grew up visiting. And so it was right after my sixth grade class about climate change, I went and visited Iran again over the summer. And I was really just struck by how awful the air pollution was there. It's just way worse than anything I'd ever seen in the United States. And thousands of people are hospitalized every single day because of how bad the air pollution was. I kind of had learned air pollution was kind of a symptom of climate change and is exacerbated by climate change. And so it kind of just generally opened up kind of the door for me to start learning more about specifically the impact that climate change was having on the Middle East. I learned temperatures there were rising more than twice the global average. And I wanted to talk to my relatives about it. And I realized they didn't really know what climate change was. But more than that, I realized there was pretty much no resources available online that were available in Farsi, which is Iran's native language. And so that's I decided to just I basically just worked with my mom to translate stuff into Farsi so that I could talk to them about climate change. And then climate change just continued to be something I was very passionate about through high school. And when I was volunteering with like these huge grassroots climate organizations, I realized all the petitions we were putting out, like all the infographics on social media, like everything was only available in English. And so I couldn't help but think like, oh, well, people like my relatives basically are not being included in this conversation. And in order for climate action to really become a movement, we need to be much more global and engaging people, specifically the people who are being worst impacted. They are the people who have the most important stories to share about actually the impacts of climate change and why it's so damaging. Um, and so I basically started Climate Cardinals with like that general premise of what if everyone just translated resources and then like sent them to their relatives so that we informed more people. And it now has like grown over the last, I think, like 4.5 years, like beyond anything I could have ever initially imagined.
I actually lived with an indigenous population in Ecuador over the summer. And so it's super disheartening to see and hear that there are so many populations out there who don't have access to that information.
Yeah, one of my best friends, Helena, like she actually lives in Ecuador, part of one of those indigenous populations. They know that climate change is happening. They can see the impacts on their communities. The real discrepancy comes in empowering them with these resources, with these statistics in their language, so they can actually then go on social media. They can go on the news and be able to tell people this is what is happening to my community. And it's these stories, I mean, I'm sure you guys can resonate more than anyone in the vein of like how important and powerful stories are. Like these are the stories that actually end up moving the needle and getting people, corporations, politicians to take action.
I've actually heard you speak a few times, which is so exciting. It's kind of like a full circle moment for me too.
Wait, no way.
Yeah, so the first time I heard you speak, it was in 2022 at a climate march in New York City that I helped plan. And then in 2023 at the UNA USA Global Engagement Summit, where you gave the final remarks and you told a story about your garden and your mother. And it really resonated with me because I initially joined the climate movement as well because of like my own like family and how that resonated with me. So, what motivates you and drives your activism and civic engagement?
First, that's so cool. That makes me so happy. That's amazing. I literally still sometimes forget. I feel like I very much do things in a vacuum where it's like when I go to give a speech or something, I'm just so focused on like, okay, I need to go give my speech. I forget there's like actually real people out there who like saw it and listened to it. So that's amazing. Like that makes me so happy. And this is very much like a full circle moment. Um, but I think in terms of like really what drives my activism, I think it really has always just come from like a genuine place of care, concern, and curiosity. Learning about climate change in school and being so shocked and alarmed that this crisis was basically unfolding and that it didn't seem like our world leaders basically cared. Like I was so shocked that the urgency with which my science teacher was talking about climate change was not reflected in the news or in anything that I was seeing kind of like in pop culture. Then looking at myself through the lens of like, what am I good at? Like, what could I potentially do to actually help to close this gap? Like, I love media and communication and content creation. And I think that that dovetailed really nicely with like the work that I was doing to basically like use social media as a vehicle to recruit people to volunteer, but also to like use it as a dissemination channel to get more people access to resources.
I just kind of want to shift our focus to climate anxiety. So, two questions. How do you personally experience climate anxiety and what do you do to manage it?
Yeah, I think that it's really sad and scary when you turn on the news and you just see these horrible headlines talking about how we are seeing unprecedented levels of temperature rise. We're seeing unprecedented droughts, flooding, wildfires, all of these horrible things that are happening. It can be really disheartening, especially when you juxtapose that with just how little action we're seeing from world leaders. And so it's definitely been something that I think has really weighed heavy on me at times. I think, especially for me, the experience of actually being able to go to some of these UN climate conferences, witnessing the amount of greenwashing or like fossil fuel lobbyists that are actually present has definitely been like a very disheartening experience. With that said, for me, working with young people through Climate Cardinals, literally from all over the world, all of who literally work in their free time on this issue for free, has been just one of the most beautiful, touching experiences I've ever had in my life. Like, it's so crazy to me that this all started with me, like, my friend basically putting out a TikTok being like, "Hey, like, do you wanna sign up to volunteer with us?" And then it organically just went so viral because all these young people were like, "Absolutely, we would love to volunteer and work with you." And so I think being able to recognize, like, climate anxiety is a very real thing, and it is completely understandable. If people were not scared about this, I think that actually would make me more anxious. But recognizing, like, there are incredible people who are working on climate solutions, like, every single day, both students working on their spare time, but also professionals, people who are dedicating, like, resources towards this, venture capitalists, et cetera, um, really helps to put into perspective that by focusing on the good that is happening and the people who are taking action, then we can kind of start to soothe, climate anxiety and focus on it in, like, a very productive way.
I know I definitely have climate anxiety. I could definitely feel overwhelmed because when it comes to like the whole concept of climate change, it just feels so much bigger than me.
I think that a lot of what has helped my climate anxiety has been learning from the climate movement just how much this is actually like a systemic issue versus like hyper fixating on like individual guilt, shame, or individual action generally. Like, I remember when I first entered the climate movement, or even when I was first translating like resources for my relatives, I was like, you guys need to drive your cars less. Like, you need to be vegetarian, like I am, like, et cetera, et cetera. And it wasn't until, like, I met other activists and started doing more research and, like, really learning that I was actually, in a lot of ways, contributing to the problem because I was actually deflecting blame from the people who really were to blame, which was, like, these huge corporations, industries, politicians, and I was instead making people feel so anxious and, paralyzed. My time and energy is actually best spent working on things like getting out the vote and getting people to realize that they need to be like holding certain corporations accountable and being able to admit that I was wrong in the original way that I was thinking about climate change, and being able to focus on like educating people in like also a more positive and motivating way, I think has really helped me as an activist to feel less anxious about climate change and also feel more empowered to realize like am a lot more knowledgeable about how best to use my time and energy.
Oh, that's really introspective.
At first, I was like, kind of shaming people. Like, I hate to admit it because I was just like, you guys aren't doing your part, this, that, and the third. When really, when I took the time to educate myself, like, there's bigger enemies and like fish to fry in a way. It definitely helped me with my like climate anxiety as well. But speaking of mental health, you are currently on the advisory board of Born This Way Foundation, founded by Lady Gaga and her mother, Cynthia. Tell us more about your work with the Born This Way Foundation.
Yeah, I feel so lucky to be part of the Born This Way Foundation because I think that their mission of basically like making it cool to be kind and really prioritizing people's mental health just deeply, deeply resonates with me. I mean, as a young woman on the internet, especially one that has like a social media platform, I mean, the amount of horrible things that young women have to deal with on the internet is really saddening and really, really heartbreaking. And I think just generally, I mean, the amount that young people really have to deal with when it comes to social media, just how detrimental generally social media platforms are for the health of young people, is an issue that I'm really glad is getting more awareness and more visibility. Because I think the more that we can destigmatize like talking about this as a topic, the more people will feel liberated to ask for help, honestly, when they do feel like they feel sad or down about either comments that they're receiving or generally feel like social media is making them feel bad about themselves.
What advice do you have for students who want to get into just activism in general?
There's this incredible diagram that this climate scientist, I believe her name is like Dr. Ayana Elizabeth, created. And basically, what the diagram shows is like, look at what the issue is, and then look at kind of like what you're passionate about, and then look at what you like your skill set is and like what you're good at. And then finding the intersection of all of those is how best to kind of approach activism. And so I would definitely say like everyone's path and the way that they approach activism is going to look different depending on both what they're interested in and their skill set. Everyone should feel empowered to be an activist. Everyone should realize like being a good person and incrementally making the world better is something that everyone and anyone can do, and they can just do that iteratively every single day. Like I didn't wake up one day and have like a nonprofit or be working with the UN. Like it kind of all started very slowly, and I think encouraging people to begin their journey with a small step, like no matter how small it may be, um is what is really like the most important thing to get more people involved.
When I first wanted to like try to help out, I was a bit scared to like put myself out there and march and stuff like that. So like I tried to use like transferable skills in a way because I'm a film student. So I would like go to weekly strikes and like help take pictures and like spread awareness with like Instagram posts and stuff like that. And I think it's really important that people really know that they have a lot of skills that are so valuable for like whatever movements they are trying to advocate for.
Something I always talk about is when I was younger, like 17, 16, even 18, I was so afraid of being perceived as cringy. And even to this day, like I'm still afraid sometimes of being perceived as cringy. And I think like nobody wants to talk about it, but it is like super, super real. And what I will tell you is like your fear of judgment by your peers is 100% holding you back. And I promise that there is nothing like more inspiring to your friends than you talking about things that you care about.
I feel like when it comes to me, I really fear judgment. So hearing that, I feel like just like you said, it's holding me back. So it's made me realize a couple of things. So thank you so much for speaking with us.
You guys are so sweet. I mean, the teenagers who are going to be listening to this, like, I'm literally just a few years older. Like, there's no reason why the people who are like listening to stuff like this can't do the same thing that I'm doing.
I was doing some research on you and I was like, oh wait, what? Were you born in '01? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So I was like, what? That is not too far from my age. That's crazy.
It's not. Guys, like, I'm not even joking. Like, you literally are going to be talking about the same cool things that you're doing.
We've spoken to a lot of great people for this podcast season already, from Sophia Kianni to students from around the country to the US Surgeon General.
Wait, speaking of the US Surgeon General, remember how we talked about taking breaks from your phone and how we made a pact not to use our phones half an hour before bedtime? Have you been doing that?
James, I have been doing that. And let me tell you how helpful it's been. Like, I used to have so many sleeping problems, and it's just been like putting away my phone. It's like I've been so much more mindful about that to just not use my phone throughout the day. Now that I don't use it like before bedtime, now I've moved on to an hour before bedtime. I'm just like, my sleep has never been better, and I'm incredibly thankful for our little pact. But how has it been for you?
Well, just hearing your story, that's definitely so inspiring, and I hope our listeners are even inspired by your little story. For me, actually, for the past week, I've been coming home so late, like around like 11 p.m., 12 a.m., that by the time I get into my house, I'm just knocked out on my bed. And so I haven't been on my phone, but for a different reason, not because of discipline, but because I am way too tired to do anything else. But I did definitely try it out the first like few days after we recorded that. Definitely saw the same effects that you saw. I felt so much better in the mornings. I mentioned before that my eyes get really dry after looking at my phone at night. And so I noticed that my eyes were no longer getting that dry. It's been awesome. Well, let's keep working on it and checking in with each other. On Our Minds Season 4 is produced by Student Reporting Labs in collaboration with KUOW's RadioActive Youth Media.
Today's episode was produced by lead podcast producer Briget Ganske with research and fact-checking by Simran Gupta.
Frankie St. Pierre Nelson edited and mixed this episode. Approval and oversight by editorial director Marie Kusik and executive producer Leah Clapman.
Theme music by Joseph Broad. Additional music from Blue Dot Sessions.
If you or someone you know needs help, we have a list of resources at studentreportinglabs.org/mental health resources.